10 years ago, Kenya deployed her troops to Somalia to fight Al-Shabaab militants and create a buffer zone to prevent them from crossing over to launch attacks on our soil. Well, the soldiers have managed to keep the terrorists at bay, but for some, not without paying a very heavy price. Well, several soldiers have lost their lives and several others left with permanent injuries. Wahiga Mwaura brings us the story of Major Alex Hinga, who nearly lost his legs fighting Al-Shabaab militants.
June 23rd in the year 2012 will remain a memorable day for Major Alex Hinga. Major Hinga was one of the senior officers assigned to lead a battle between KDF troops and Al-Shabaab militants inside Somalia. On this day, Major Hinga was leading a platoon of 39 soldiers during a routine patrol along the Kolbio-Badade Road, approximately 40 kilometers from the Kenya-Somalia border.
We started out pretty early. I remember telling my men tutaenda na turudi kabla adui akunywe chai. And so we head out, and it seemed normal for almost 30 kilometers. Normally, there are areas we expected contact, at junctions, at likely ambush areas. Tukipita hiyo siku asubuhi nikarealize ya kwamba ile town ya Badade, wale wanakijiji walikuwa wameamka mapema kuliko kawaida. Ikakuwa kwamba pengine walikuwa wametarajia kuna jambo litatendeka ile siku.
Then they suddenly came under attack from heavily armed Al-Shabaab militants who had laid an ambush. Major's armored personnel carrier, APC, was hit by an improvised explosive device, followed by a quick succession of bullets.
The vehicle that was immediately behind us had also been hit, and it was quite some distance off. So as we were driving back, that's when all hell broke loose. We got hit by an ID, and the vehicle, and the APC is around 15 tons. But it was like lifted off and landed. And I think the first thing was I was in shock because I could not feel my legs.
Despite the injury he had suffered, Major Hinga continued encouraging his fellow soldiers to engage the militants who were determined to wipe out the entire platoon.
I think the person who was shocked was my driver, because now the vehicle stalled and the entire bit of the cabin came down. He didn't have a steering wheel, the radio had come down, and we just had a shell, and the rubble was sitting on my legs. And I think he also had got hit on the head, and one of his legs was also broken. But I think the fact that mine were dangling shocked him even more. So he lifted himself up and lifted my legs onto his chair. Later I realized this was life-saving. Life-saving because the fact that my legs were now in his chair, it stilled a bit of the blood flow. When we got hit, we absorbed the impact, and the calcaneus bone was smashed, and so the leg like flattened out. This one, the other one was broken, was dangling, and then he lifted it and put it on his chair, but this other had been smashed.
As the platoon commander, it was difficult for him to reckon with the fact that he was first to be injured in the ambush.
I was angry that a second ago we were in contact and we were fine. Now we're back in contact. Make it even worse, I could not fathom myself being the first casualty. So I'd imagined operations, I'd imagined taking care of men hit when they've been injured. I had never imagined me being the casualty.
Major Hinga was down to his last bullet and resolved to use it on himself instead of being captured by the terrorists.
And I remember thinking, now, what do I do? When the enemy closes in, will I use this round on the enemy, or will I wait to die in cold blood? And I think the last thing I wanted was to become a prisoner of war. So I remember it crossing my mind, should the worst come to the worst, this round will stop me from becoming a prisoner of war. Unfortunately, the objective we were to get to, the previous night had also rained quite a lot. The team that was ahead of us was also unable to reach us. And just as the things were getting messy, our armor was down, I had the familiar sound of attack helicopters. And I had never been more excited and more reassured to hear the sound of the, we call it in military jargon the YY, it's the 500 MD. As they started firing their rockets, I came alive. I realized I wasn't going to die that day. I was not going to become a prisoner of war.
Hinga and his injured colleagues were rescued and evacuated to the Dobli KDF hospital at the Kenya-Somalia border, where they received first aid before being airlifted to the Forces Memorial Hospital in Nairobi.
The next morning, I got to discuss with the colonel, who was, he's now brigadier, Colonel Dr. Mwika, who was to be my surgeon for the next 3 months, and we were discussing the options. He told me, Hinga, I'll be able to take care of your right leg, which I thought the dangling leg. We might be able to fix this. But from the x-rays, your left leg is a bag of bones.
Major Hinga never knew whether he'd be able to walk again after that experience or not. And he asked his fiancée to choose between living with a disabled man or moving on.
First, I told her, Faith, you have to now weigh your options. I was a whole man, now I'm an injured man, and you have to decide whether you want to stay on or you want to leave. And I would urge you to leave. I remember telling her I would urge you to leave because I realized I was now going to be disabled. I didn't know how much of healing I would get. But Faith stayed on. Faith watched me during those hospital days. And I think on leaving hospital, I realized we had to make this formal. And though she became my wife. And I think that has been a serious support system for myself.
Hinga is still determined to go back to Somalia and join his colleagues in fighting the Al-Shabaab militants. And to stay mission ready, he has since taken to cycling for rehabilitation. Wahiga Mwaura, Citizen TV.